I'm Matt Fitzgerald, author of How Bad You Want It, and you are listening to the Physical Performance Show.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by the Gold Coast Marathon and Pogo Physio. I trust you've been having a great week, and I trust that you've been enjoying pursuing your physical best performance. On today's episode, I share a conversation with you that I had with best-selling author and avid endurance racer, Matt Fitzgerald. Now, for this episode, I brought alongside me Lewis Craig, Pogo physiotherapist and avid ultra trail runner himself, to explore one of Matt's recent publications, his book, How Bad Do You Want It? Mastering the Psychology of Mind Over Muscle. It was Lewis Craig who first introduced me to the writings of Matt Fitzgerald, so I thought it was fitting that we had Lewis along for the ride today. Matt Fitzgerald has authored numerous books, including The Runner's Edge, Run, the Mind-Body Method of Running by Feel, Iron War, and one of my favorites, 80-20 Running, and also The Runner's Body. But it was this title, How Bad Do You Want It?, that really grabbed my attention. I enjoyed the book myself, as did Lewis. And one of the things that Matt does so well is he brings together both the science and also brilliant practical examples of elite performers whose mental fitness either allowed them to reach peak performance or saw them underperform. We intuitively all recognize that great athletic performance requires the mastering of mind and the body. Elite athletes have known for decades that this is true, yet science has just been able to show and prove why it's true. I believe this book, How Bad Do You Want It?, will forever change how you answer the question of how bad do you want it when you're racing endurance events. The lessons learned in How Bad Do You Want It will help you explore your own limits and uncover your true physical potential. And that is the aim of this show. We all know that as athletes, we face challenges that present opportunities to increase our mental fitness in some way almost daily. How Bad Do You Want It gives you examples of athletes increasing their mental fitness by overcoming problems such as underperforming, choking in races, suffering severe injury, repeated failing to attain an important goal, and facing physical superior competition. Athletes featured in How Bad Do You Want It include 2008 Beijing Olympic Marathon champion Sammy Wanjiru, Jenny Simpson, Greg LeMond, Siri Lindley, former The Physical Performance Show podcast guest, Cadel Evans, Nathan Cohen and Joe Sullivan, Paula Newby-Fraser, Ryan Vail, Thomas Voeckler, and of course Steve Prefontaine. Matt himself has had a long history of competing in endurance events, starting when he first became a runner at the age of 11 after running the last mile of the 1983 Boston Marathon with his father. After graduating college, Matt soon found his love for physical performance intersecting with his ability and passion to write. Decades on, Matt is an acclaimed endurance sports and nutrition writer and also a certified sports nutritionist. Matt's a regular columnist on competitor.com and also active.com. He's also contributed regularly to Bicycling, Men's Health, Triathlete, Men's Journal, Outside, Runner's World, Shape, and Women's Health. On today's episode, Lewis and myself with Matt explore why it is that you have to endure to get the most out of yourself, why the linchpin to successful endurance performance is the perception of effort, why you must brace yourself for the worst in order to race at your best, the two ways that you can alter your perception of effort and therefore improve your performance, why endurance athletes perform better when they are chasing such of effort, why you must brace yourself for the worst in order to race at your best, the 2 ways that you can alter your perception of effort and therefore improve your performance, why endurance athletes perform better when they are chasing something, why it helps to stay focused on external stimuli when you are racing, why setting yourself up to expect more will allow you to achieve more, and why a race is like a firewalk. So, if you're ready to explore your true physical potential to master the psychology of mind over muscle, then jump in with Lewis and myself, Matt Fitzgerald, author of How Bad Do You Want It? And let's see how it's done. Matt Fitzgerald, we are certainly excited to have you on the call today. Both myself and Lewis as physiotherapists here in Australia with a focus on running and endurance sports are avid fans of your work. And in fact, Lewis introduced me to your work through 80-20 running. So we've both just finished devouring How Bad Do You Want It? And that's what we want to focus on today. First question though, Matt, tell us a little bit more about yourself. You're an avid endurance athlete and obviously a very talented author on the as well. So what's your backstory, Matt?
Yeah, I'm one of those people who's, if you look back at my life story, I was sort of born for one thing. Not that I'm the greatest at what I do, but it's the only thing I was really meant to do. I started running when I was 11 years old, influenced by my father, who was running marathons when I was that age. My father is also a writer, and I developed an interest in writing when I was even younger than that, maybe 9 years old. And that's just who I've been the whole way. I didn't necessarily expect to write about running, but that's how it worked out. It's not shocking in retrospect that I did. So that's the backstory.
You write in the book about one of your early races and your disappointment in your ability to get the best out of yourself, really seeding one of the themes that How Bad Do You Want It delves deep into, and that's athletes trying to maximize their physical capacity through their psychology. Can you take us inside that world for you at that point, the disappointment, the feelings you had around your performances then, and then how you've come back as really Matt Fitzgerald Mark II in more recent years with some better psychology, I guess you'd say?
Yeah, so I ran competitively, throughout high school, as we call it in the States, I had a certain amount of talent. I wasn't destined for the Olympics or anything, but I wasn't bad. But my head proved to be weaker than my body. As anyone who has any level of experience in endurance sports knows, it's tough. Endurance racing is not pleasant, and mental toughness is just an essential ingredient to success, regardless of how much physical ability you have. And I just didn't have that, and it really ruined the sport for me when I was young. I did not fulfill my potential just because it wasn't so much the pressure to win that got to me. I know that's a factor for some athletes. For me, it was just the suffering. I recoiled from just the discomfort you have to endure if you want to get the most out of yourself, and ended up quitting the sport, not running in college, though, I had every intention to do so. Got back into the sport as an adult. And when I did, I had, as I explained in the book, I had two goals. One was to fulfill the potential I had not realized when I was an adolescent. And the other was to become mentally tough. And they were distinct goals, but obviously I couldn't fulfill my potential without becoming mentally tough. But really, I viewed them somewhat independently, and the one was just as important as the other. So that became sort of my mission in the second act of my life as an endurance athlete.
And Matt, how prevalent do you think this gap is in endurance athletes' performance, their physical capacity being maximized and, their mental toughness or mental fitness, as you phrase it in How Bad Do You Want It, being in some way a handicap that doesn't allow them to maximise it. What percentage of athletes would you say aren't maximising their physical best capacity due to their psychology?
Interesting question. I'm tempted to say 99%.
Yeah.
Obviously, some people, especially for recreational athletes, they make, because it's not, their career isn't depending, or their livelihood doesn't depend on their race course performance as it does for a professional athlete. They're not fulfilling their genetic potential in part simply by choice, because, running or triathlon or cycling or whatever it is important to them, but only so important. And so for them, if they're walking away in knowing, okay, I only got 80 or 90% of my ability, actuated, they're fine with that. But, if the spirit of the question is really like among those who wish to realize 100% of their physical potential, how many actually do? I think it's a very small percentage, these sports are just so mental. Like, almost every athlete I've encountered is dealing with some type of mental barrier to better physical performance. The exceptions are, just the best in the world. The champions out there, they're the ones who are firing on all cylinders. They have obviously the physical ability, but they are also able to overcome the physical barriers to realize their physical ability.
I was going to say, Matt, you talk there about talk in the book about all these different athletes and all their stories and how they can draw out different aspects of their mental fitness or mental toughness, each with their own unique insight as to what works for them. One of the fundamental parts of it all starts with perceived effort, and you talk a lot about one can't succeed without changing their relationship with perception of effort. Can you talk a little bit more about why that matters?
Sure. Yeah. So, part of the reason I wrote this book was, I have, an abiding interest in the, psychological dimension of endurance sports. The other is that it's kind of an exciting time in the science of the psychology of endurance sports. There's this new psychobiological model, of endurance performance. The father of it is also the forward writer for my book, Sam Wellemarcora, an Italian guy who's based in the UK. And this concept of perception of effort is the foundation of his theory. Perception of effort it's basically your global sense of how hard you're working at any given moment when you're performing endurance exercise. And it's a perception just like any other, like, thirst or, perceptions of heat or cold, pain. Those are all, distinct, discrete perceptions that we have. And we've recognized them for eons. Perception of effort has been one that's been largely unrecognized, but the science is showing that it is real, and it's just as much a thing as pain or thirst or these other perceptions. And it's kind of the limiter of endurance performance. The art of endurance racing is the art of pacing, and pacing is based on perception of effort. Like, how far you have to go. I personally would never sign up for a race if they didn't tell me how far it was, right? How far you have to go, how far into it you are, and how you feel. And you may have metrics like, pace or power or whatever to help guide you. But the science kind of shows that those actually don't really matter too much in terms of actually getting to the finish line in the least amount of time possible. It's really based primarily on feel. And yes, you do experience things like pain and heat and other things, but the bedrock, the linchpin to, a successful endurance performance is this perception of effort. Like, how hard am I working? If I'm take like a 10-kilometer running race, if I'm 4 kilometers into that race, how hard am I working, and is that too hard, not hard enough, or just right, so that when I get to the finish line, I'm completely exhausted, but I haven't hit the wall before then, and slow down involuntarily. Like, that's what perception of effort is all about. And it mediates everything. There's simply, what the research is showing is that there's just simply no way to improve as an endurance athlete, as you suggested in your question, Lewis, without altering your relationship with perception of effort in one of two ways. Either you can increase your maximum tolerance so that you're just simply able to suffer more, you're willing to to dig deeper, or actually the more fruitful way to improve is to experience less effort at any given level of output. So you go back to the running example, running 5 minutes per kilometer feels easier than it did 2 weeks ago. Or it feels easier than it did an hour ago because you took caffeine or something like that. There's myriad ways to actually make a 5-minute kilometer of running feel easier.
Matt, you mentioned there, and certainly you label this in the book, that getting to a finish line in the fastest manner possible as an endurance athlete, you describe it as a dance. The mind wants to get to the finish line as soon as possible. This concept called inhibitory control wants to make it as pleasant as possible. So can you take us inside the world of inhibitory control and how that plays a role in us maximizing performance, but also, trying to get to that finish line with that duality of needs being met? Right,
yeah. So inhibitory control is a psychology term that refers to anytime, and this happens all the time in life, not just in endurance sports, when you have incompatible simultaneous goals, when basically you want two or more things at the same time, but you can't really have them both. The example I always give is, if you want to lose, 5 kilos, but you love German chocolate cake, and there's actually a fresh slice of German chocolate cake sitting in front of you, and you're hungry, and you haven't eaten in several hours. Like, sort of, you want both. I want to lose weight, but I want this cake. Like, what do I do? Inhibitory control is the brain capacity or the mental capacity that allows you to stay focused on typically the thing you truly want more, or the more of the long-term objective. And in endurance racing, where inhibitory control comes into play is that, you come into your competition with a goal, right? To get to the finish line as fast as possible, certainly, possibly in a certain amount of time, or to, win your age group or whatever it is. So that requires that you suffer. There's no way to, to maximize performance in an endurance race without suffering. But obviously, it's instinctual for all humans to avoid voluntary suffering. And these races are voluntary, right? You sign up, like no one's putting a gun to your head, presumably, and making you do it. So, you get to a point in each competition where you're like, how bad do I want it? It's like, this hurts. And there's a part of you, there's that, devil on your left shoulder saying, come on, let's just cruise it in from here. Like, it doesn't matter that much. It's like you got beer and a burger waiting for you after. But then there's that angel on your right shoulder saying, come on, like, you won't be able to live with yourself. You do want this. You trained for months. And so that's where inhibitory control comes into play, where you have to decide, which do I really like? How bad do I want this? What do I really want the most? How much am I willing to endure to achieve my objective?
And so really the rest, the book then takes us on the journey, including some fantastic examples, which we'll, I'm sure, reference shortly, of how we change as endurance athletes our relationship with perception of effort. While we're still there, Matt, can you just explain the role of things like anxiety on the perception of effort, also the effect of things like music and caffeine, and things. How can we change our perception of effort? Is the big question to then improve performance.
Yeah, so the reason Samuela Marcora's model is called psychobiological is that it's right there in the word. it sort of crams together both mind and body, psycho, bio, right? And this concept of perception of effort is where the two meet. Take training, for example. Training is something that we consider to be purely physical, right? But how does training actually make you able to perform better as an endurance athlete? It does so by making that 5-minute kilometer feel easier. And in no other way does it do so. Like, as your physical capacity increases, that can't possibly happen without the same level of output that felt difficult yesterday, or I'm sorry, more likely 3 weeks ago, feel a little bit easier today. And, if there was some way that like your actual physical capacity increased, like, your heart became more powerful and you had more aerobic enzymes, working in your muscles, all those, physical changes that occur as your body adapts to training. If all that stuff happened and it somehow didn't change how hard a 5-minute kilometer felt when you ran, then you wouldn't be able to run any faster. Like, even though your body could do more, if it didn't feel easier, you couldn't do more. But obviously that doesn't actually happen. As your body changes. The analogy I like to give is like a horse and jockey. Like, you've got a horse whipping the flanks of, the jockey whipping the flanks of the horse. The jockey's like your brain, right? Saying, go, 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 go. And your horse has all the physical capacity. Like, the jockey can't do anything except try to make the horse go. Like, as the horse, if you got a faster horse, you can go faster, but only if the jockey is willing to work harder as well. So that's the physical side. But like, so training enhances performance by making any given level of output feel easier. But a whole host of different interventions that affect the brain and not the body can do exactly the same thing, or do the opposite. You mentioned anxiety as an example. There's actually growing body of evidence that athletes who either there are certain actually genes that make you prone to anxiety. If you have those, you're actually likely to underperform relative to your physical ability as an endurance athlete. And also, if you just, if you take a test to measure, like a computer test that measures your propensity to anxiety, if you score high on anxiety in one of those tests, you're also likely to underperform relative to your physical ability as an endurance athlete. Because going into an endurance competition in an anxious state will make the same level of output, that 5-minute kilometer, feel more difficult. Caffeine will have the opposite effect. Motivation will have the opposite effect. If you have, if you're promised, $1 million for breaking your PR in that 10K race, you're more likely, you're more motivated. Exercising in a group, if you're in a group environment, because we're social animals, that just simply being around people who are doing the same thing you're doing, there's a competitive aspect, but there's also a cooperative aspect to that reduces perceived effort relative to your output. So it's a long list. Zapping your brain. There's this new book by Alex Hutchinson, the sweat science columnist for Outside Magazine, called Endure. He goes into this there, where I think he had it done to himself as part of his research for the book. Transcranial electromagnetic stimulation. So you're actually sending electromagnetic energy into particular parts of your brain that are involved in perception of effort. When that is done before you do like a cycling time trial, you perform better, like zapping your brain. So it really doesn't matter where it comes from. It can be training, it can be nutrition, it can be like just self-talk. Self-talk, like positive self-talk, has been shown to reduce perception of effort and thereby enhance performance. So it's this new model, this new approach to understanding endurance performance, where mind and body are sort of fused together and seen as like the way athletes have always known they are. The scientists have just caught up, like they're interpenetrating. So there's just this endless list of possibilities, like things, mechanisms for enhancing endurance performance by reducing perception of effort relative to output.
listening to Matt Fitzgerald, best-selling author of How Bad Do You Want It? Mastering the Psychology of Mind Over Muscle, sharing around the principles and concepts that will help you ensure that you do just what the title said and master your own mental fitness. Support for today's show comes from the Gold Coast Marathon. Just like the Physical Performance Show, the Gold Coast Marathon encourages runners of all ages and abilities to push their boundaries and strive to complete a personal challenge. The Gold Coast Marathon is held annually on the first weekend in July and is a must-do event for any budding athlete, weekend warrior, or family looking for a challenge to complete together. Choose from distances that range from the 5.7 kilometre run right through to the full feature-length marathon. Run for the good times at the Gold Coast Marathon. Visit goldcoastmarathon.com.au. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo Physio to cross their physio finish line. That's where we high-five you and tell you that you've finished rehabilitation and celebrate with you the fact that you're back to your physical best. In addition to traditional session-to-session appointments, we offer some industry-first models of care, such as our 2, 6 and 12-week fixed-fee unlimited access finish line programs and our fixed-fee monthly wellness booster packages, all designed to help you save money and recover faster. For more information, jump over to pogophysio.com.au to schedule your initial 1-hour appointment. For now, let's jump back to Matt Fitzgerald, author of How Bad Do You Want It? Mastering the Psychology of Mind Over Muscle.
Brilliant. So let's go there on some of these facets with perception of effort. And I think it's worth noting that, you're right, Matt, that it's physically maxing out as a limit of exertion will be capped, not physically, it'll be capped by the ability to endure pain or suffer or our perception of effort. So if we get practical now and we go through a few of the great examples you outline in the book, starting with, your chapter, which is a race is like a firewalk.
Yeah, I love that metaphor that you use, Matt. It's certainly, in some recent speed sessions, become a real firewalk, where I've really embraced the fire. So can you let listeners know a little bit about how a race works like a firewalk?
Yeah, so, probably most people listening have not actually experienced a firewalk. I have not. But the idea there is that, you're walking in bare feet on hot coals or ash or whatever it is. And, it's uncomfortable. And the farther you go, the more uncomfortable it gets. And eventually you reach a point where it's too much, right? You have to hop off. And as the analogy I give in the book is that, your goal, like your ultimate physical limit is this wall at the end of the fire pit. And what the research shows is that in any type of endurance competition, you're never actually able to reach that wall. It's there. You do have physical limits, but you can't get there because it becomes too, no matter how tough you are, it becomes too hot, too painful. Your feet are burning. You got to get off at some point. And so that gets to the notion that really, although physical limits do exist, they are real. You actually, as endurance, like sprinters encounter the physical limits, powerlifters do, and anything where you're going for, maximal human performance that takes just a few seconds. Yeah, you're absolutely just limited by your physical capacity. But an endurance athlete, anyone who's doing something, a race that lasts longer than, say, 30 seconds, that's really not the case anymore because you have to pace yourself, and pacing is done by perception of effort. So there's a cognitive element to that as well, where you have to be, you have to know how fast you should go, like especially if it's a very long race, like an Ironman triathlon. Like, well, how fast should you swim the first 100 meters of an Ironman triathlon? Like, you've got 140.6 miles ahead of you. You're a minute into it. Like, how do you know? Like, you have to be. It's a kind of smarts. It's a kind of intelligence that allows you to to know how to hold back just enough so that hours and hours later, you're just getting exhausted at the finish line. And if you look at the examples of, elite triathletes from history who've collapsed within sight of the finish line, how close, what a razor's edge, that can be. So there's a cognitive element to it. You have to be smart, but there's also just a perceptual element to it. Like you have to be able to just feel your body. And you have to, there's a toughness element to it as well, which is overplayed. Toughness is not the only ingredient, but it's crucial. You have to be able to, someone who's mentally weak, as I was as a high school runner, when they're, suffering at a certain level, it's just intolerable. But for the next athlete over, they might be feeling exactly the same level of discomfort and say, hey, this is no big deal. I can go even deeper than this. So, that's, a race truly is like a fire walk where, it's just not like a sprint, like the 100-meter dash in the Olympics that, glues us to our televisions every 4 years. Perception of effort, who cares? Like, it's going to be over in 10 seconds. I don't care how much I'm suffering. I can do anything for 10 seconds. Endurance sports just aren't like that. It's, the true limiter, the thing that you actually hit your head against, which determines what your time is for that race, is perception of effort. Like, just how it feels and how you're able to manage that.
And you cite that beautiful example, Matt, of Sammy, and I'm going to pronounce the surname wrong here, but Wanjiru, correct me here, Matt.
Wanjiru. I have no idea.
well, even listening to the audio version of how bad you want it, I think you had it nailed down there well. But Sammy Wanjiru, as an amazing athlete who, even being underdone on the start line of the 2010 Chicago Marathon quite drastically, still found a near world record time to win that race in a duel to the end, where anyone watching would have thought he'd been dropped in the fellow Ethiopian runner that he was competing against, and yet he still found that ability to walk up, embrace that firewalk, and push himself to a limit, which I know you've cited, had you in tears when you first viewed that.
Yeah, I mean, that is, just taking a step back, in writing this book, it was really this new science that was kind of the reason I wanted to write it. But sort of like, a smart mother or father who does the cooking for their household, and they have children that they want to get to eat vegetables, but the kids don't like vegetables. So they find clever ways to like put spinach or broccoli in like a cheesy casserole. So the kids think it tastes good. They don't even know they're eating vegetables. Like, I had the same strategy with this book where like it was really the science I wanted to impart, but in order to make it palatable to readers, I wanted to do it I wanted to deliver it in a story format. So the stories are the cheesy casserole and this example of Sammy Wanjiru dueling with Faisa Lilisa in the 2010 Chicago Marathon was to me like the perfect example, just like proof positive that sometimes it's not the physically strongest endurance athlete that wins a race. It's someone who's got enough physical capacity, but really just has an edge on the mental side. And, it's just like, nobody who, watches that race and is, generally knowledgeable of the backgrounds of the two runners. Wanjiru was the more talented of the two, but he was not at 100% going into that. In the book, as I detail like the whole year that Wanjiru had before that, and it was a disaster. It was, he was just not ready. But he had, for him, and this is where, personality comes into play. It's not the same formula for everyone. You have to like sort of know who you are and develop your strengths and work on your weaknesses, sometimes work around your weaknesses. But Wanjiru was just like a kamikaze. Like he was reckless, and he was just like a damn the torpedoes full speed ahead kind of dude. And like he understood that about himself, and it was his just conscious weapon on the race course where, he was just going to, he won the 2008 Olympic marathon in Beijing. And before the race, I think it might have been his first marathon or maybe his second. He was just a kid. He was 21 years old. And before the race, he told his coach, I must kill them from the gun. It was like an 85-degree day in Beijing. He was going up against this murderer's row of more experienced, and many of them equally talented athletes. But he ran the first mile of that 85, well, I'm talking Fahrenheit, 85-degree Fahrenheit. Sorry, American. But he ran the first mile at world record pace. Within 5K, there was only a handful of people. 5K in a 42K race, there's only a handful of people still with him. That was his style, and that's what allowed him. It was just his edge. It's also, the reason he ended up dying at 24, just months after that race, which is tragic. But yeah, I mean, there's, Exhibit A in the argument that the mind is just as important as the body for endurance performance.
And to clarify for listeners, Sammy didn't pass away due to pushing himself to death, because as you cite in the book, Matt, that's just
right.
that just can't happen. But let's talk about a few of these other great practical tips, Matt, on how athletes can enhance their physical performance through mental fitness.
And you talk there about Sammy and how his style for mental fitness is about really being reckless and pushing the boundaries, whereas other athletes really like to brace themselves before they run, and the power that has then on their performance and how hard they can push, and really being intentional about that run and that brace that comes with it.
Yeah.
How important that bracing yourself for the pain can be in improving your performance.
Yeah. So the concept of bracing yourself refers to situations where you know that you're about to experience something challenging or unpleasant or difficult, which, as we all know, endurance racing is. It's one of many kinds of experiences that have that dynamic where you sort of have to gird yourself, to kind of, get through something. It could be a visit to the dentist where, painful dental work is going to be performed, or, whatever. It could be just like a difficult conversation, with a loved one. There are situations where it's going to suck. And so what research has shown, particularly with research on pain tolerance, is that your mental attitude before that, difficult or unpleasant experience can make a crucial difference for better or worse in terms of how you perform in that circumstance. So there are basically kind of two modes you can fall into. One is sort of wishful thinking, where you're about to go to the dentist for a root canal, or you're about to start an Ironman triathlon, and you think, maybe it won't be that bad, even though my last Ironman triathlon or my last root canal was the worst experience I've ever had in my life. I'm just, I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to hope for the best, and maybe it won't be so bad. So that's sort of just sort of a sort of denial mindset. And the other is more accepting, and that's what bracing yourself refers to, where you just say, I know this is going to suck, but I'm prepared for it. I've been through it before. I don't love pain. I don't love, perception of effort, whatever it is. But I can deal with it. So, going back to the research on pain tolerance, what it has shown is that when people have that bracing or acceptance mentality, they're actually able to tolerate a higher level of pain, because they're sort of, it sort of makes sense. It's commonsensical. It's like, this isn't worse than I thought it was going to be. It's bad. But if you sort of go into it with that denial mentality, then you're sort of surprised. You're taken off guard by the pain, and you can't tolerate as much. So in the book, the story in which I contextualize this concept is that of top American runner, Jenny Simpson. She was Jenny Behringer by birth, where she's like the most successful female American collegiate runner of all time, hands down. But when she ran her last national collegiate cross country championship, she finished 130 something. She was supposed to win. She was absolutely the hands down favorite. But she had this like weird meltdown where halfway through the race, she just collapsed to the ground. There was absolutely nothing physically wrong with her. The problem, she said in retrospect going into it, is that she had sort of overlooked her competition. It was going to be her last race as an amateur runner. She was ready to turn pro. She was hyped up as the sure winner. And so she just kind of let her guard down and went into it thinking like, this will be a cakewalk. Well, that's never a cakewalk. I mean, even though she was, physically the best runner in that race, it was still going to hurt to win, but she wasn't ready to hurt. So there was this, just weird thing where she fell on the ground and then got back up, and she was absolutely fine. And then in the last, 2K of the race, she's passing all these runners who passed her before. It still didn't get her any higher than 100 and something place in the race. A year later, she wins a world championship at 1,500 meters because she same runner, right? She had just learned her lesson, and when she went into that world championships, her attitude was, I want to win, but this could be the hardest thing I've ever done. And that was bracing herself, exactly the same thing she had failed to do a year before when she just had that humiliating failure.
And that humiliating failure, Matt, you reference, you cite in the book that, Jenny, in retrospect, sort of looks at that and would put it down to going into that NCAA cross-country title where she did have that collapse, being relatively blasé, just wanting to get it done without that, as you say, bracing that this is going to be the hardest thing she ever did, which is in complete contradiction to how she approached that, world championship title a year later.
Right. So the advice I would give, and I do give to athletes, is that you should go into each race believing you can achieve your goal, assuming it's a realistic goal, but also expecting that it could be the hardest race you've ever done. It's like, so, bracing yourself is not the same thing as pessimism. If you were pessimistic, you would say, I'm going to fail. You're not saying I'm going to fail. You're saying I'm going to succeed. I believe I can succeed, but it's going to be hard, and I'm willing to suffer to succeed.
And, I think it's well, summarised by the line in the book, you must always brace for the worst to race at your best.
Right, there you go.
Matt, one of the other great sort of practical insights I certainly took out is this concept of time being on your side, time goals being perceived as a target enhancing performance. Can you speak to that for listeners around how they can embrace this concept to maximise their performance?
Yeah, so there's abundant research showing that endurance athletes perform better when they're chasing something. There have been some clever studies done where people will come into an exercise lab and hop on stationary bikes and do some sort of simulated time trial. It could be, a 10-kilometer time trial on the bike. And so their performance is measured, and then they're asked to come back later when they're recovered and fresh and repeat the time trial, but they're competing against, they're on one of these bikes with a screen in front of them in kind of a virtual reality type of deal on the screen, and they're competing against avatars in different circumstances. But in some of the circumstances, they're given an avatar that they are told represents their performance from the previous time trial. So they're sort of racing against themselves. But what they're not told is that avatar they're racing against, which is supposed to represent their own best performance or their own performance from the previous time trial, is actually going 2% faster. So, nothing's changed in terms of their fitness. They haven't had time to get fitter or anything, but simply because they've been deceived and they're racing against what they think is something they've done before, but is actually 2% better than they did before, their performance increases, which is a great way of demonstrating that, and I give other examples in the book where if you just, vaguely and non-quantitatively try to do your best, like, here I am in a race, I'm just going to, like, my goal is to do my best. Like, you won't perform as well as if you actually have a a quantitative goal where, I want to achieve a certain time, or it could be I want to win, or I want to beat that guy. You need something external and objective to sort of latch onto, to pull you beyond what you're able to do just simply by feel. So that's what that's all about. So, most of us aren't in a position where we're, the outright winner of a competition. You can be the outright winner of a competition without even giving 100%, if you're good enough and if the competition is weak enough. But if your goal is like to improve by just be better than you ever were before, then you should become, a PR hunter, someone who is, just trying to raise the bar. As I get into in the book, there's no way to actually define, the absolute best you're capable of doing. What you can define is better than I've ever been before. So I give some examples in the book. One is this great drought. There's the legendary Ironman triathlete Paula Newby-Fraser, who, when she came around in the 1980s, just exploded notions of how fast a female triathlete could go over that distance. And she raised the bar so high that for a whole generation after her, for years and years and years, nobody went any faster than she had ever gone. And then suddenly, in 2000 something or other, Yvonne van Vlerken, it was a Dutch woman, broke the women's Ironman world record. And then the floodgates opened. And then after her, just dozens of women started going, female Ironman triathletes started going faster than Paula Newby-Fraser, this legend, had ever gone before. And it was just that same effect where it was just like the bar had been raised and everyone thought, well, this is obviously doable. The athletes who had the talent started simply chasing a higher standard. And by virtue of that, it's not as if a whole generation of female Ironman triathletes were not talented, and then a new talented generation came along. The talent was the same, or maybe marginally different, but it's just the bar had been raised, and so they were using that the dynamics of chasing, which you don't have to be someone who's capable of breaking world records to do. Whatever level you may be at, if you want to be the best you can be, you need to chase numbers, basically.
Yeah, and one of the things you also talk about on those chasing numbers, Matt, is chasing the right numbers and trying to choose a bar that's high but attainable, so that when you get to those moments in those longer races or whatever race it may be, that you perceive it as a target that's achievable as opposed to a limit that you can't reach, and how that interplay then affects your performance.
Right. Yeah, so what the research shows is that if your goal is to truly do the best you can in a given competition, your goal should be a goal that is achievable, but it is at the very limit of the possible. Because what you're really trying to do is set yourself up to try as hard as you're able to try. Like that's how when you get to the start line, the training's done, right? You're done training. Nothing can change at that point other than how hard you try. So what you want to do at that point is set yourself up to try as hard as you possibly can. And the right kind of goal setting is crucial to that. So again, if it's just vague, if it's simply, something qualitative, like I want to try as hard as I can, you won't. But if you set a goal that's just stratospheric, that's laughably out of reach, you also won't try as hard, because when you get to a certain point in the race and you realize that your goal is out of reach, you're working hard and you're behind pace and you can't do it, you're going to coast to a certain degree from there. The same thing will happen if you set a really easy goal. A goal that's sort of, it's well within your reach. You'll get well into your race and you realize, I've got this sewn up, and then you'll also coast. You simply can't make it, no matter how tough you think you are, you can't make yourself work as hard as you can if you get to a certain point in a race and you realize, I can still do what I want to do, but man, I'm going to have to turn myself inside out to do it. I give the real world example of Greg LeMond's incredible final time trial performance in the 1989 Tour de France. That's a real world example of where LeMond was set up in order to win that tour. He had to do exactly that. It worked out that way, that in order to overtake Laurent Fignon, he had to do the best he had ever done, but it wasn't out of reach, and he knew it. He just had to absolutely crush it, and he did. He won by 8 seconds, and so that's there's an art to goal setting. Yeah, and it's okay if you crash and burn. You set a terrible goal and it just doesn't work out. It's sort of self-correcting. You know what I mean? It's I want to run my first marathon in 3 hours, and you finish in 3 hours and 50 minutes. It's okay, that didn't work out so well. But then, you realize that you set a better goal the next time. And it doesn't take long, where you sort of figure out where you are. And then the idea is just to incrementally, raise the bar, stretch yourself beyond where you've been before.
You're listening to Matt Fitzgerald, author of How Bad Do You Want It? Mastering the Psychology of Mind Over Muscle, sharing around the principles that will help you develop your mental fitness and ultimately discover your true physical potential. If you missed last week's episode, it was an expert edition featuring biomechanist and 32-year professor. He goes by the name of BackFit Pro, Stuart McGill. I brought Professor McGill on as I felt that we needed to address the topic of lower back pain. And there's no one better than Professor McGill to speak wisdom around this enormous topic. Professor McGill has treated the best athletes on the planet. He's consulted for the military, all manners of sporting codes, and he's sought after internationally for his wisdom on all things lower back pain rehabilitation and also ultimate performance. So if you missed the episode, here's a little snippet from Professor McGill.
When you do the big three exercises, neurologically, you get a period of extra stiffness and stability. In some people, it lasts 20 minutes. In other people, it'll last 2 hours. But the point is, they hit a little bit harder and faster when we measured their strike dynamics. We know that sprinters can run a little bit faster. There are many professional teams that start their training sessions with the big three because it creates a stiffer platform for the spine and more explosive hip power, for example.
To tune into the full episode and explore the archives of the Physical Performance Show, simply jump over to pogophysio.com.au or also peruse the archives from your favourite podcast player. For now, let's jump back to Matt Fitzgerald, author of How Bad Do You Want It? Mastering the Psychology of Mind Over Muscle.
Matt, I've been around endurance sports for 20 plus years, started as a junior triathlete when I was 11 and still going at 37 years of age. And there's just so much in this book that some of it, when you read it or listen to it, jumps off the page as being, obvious. But what isn't so obvious is how it all joins together, and the examples really do, as you say, contextualise and pull it together. One of the things that jumped out to me, Matt, was the role in helping athletes master the psychology of their mind over muscle, the role that anxiety, self-consciousness, and then things like expectations can have on our physical performance. So, if possible, could you speak to those couple of things there, anxiety, self-consciousness, and expectations, and how that plays into performance? And obviously, there's examples galore in How Bad Do You Want It?
Yeah, so we touched on anxiety briefly before. I guess if we want to, be practical and give people listening something to walk away with, anxiety is performance limiting in almost every context. Almost not just endurance sports, but if you think of things like taking. If you have to take an important math test, if you go into that test anxious, you're likely to perform worse. Public speaking. The more anxious you are, the more likely you are to make a fool of yourself. And the more anxious you are before an endurance race, the more likely it is that you will underperform. So if you're sort of an athlete who's it's funny. I used to get intensely anxious before races. Now, not at all. I get amped up. I get excited. I get that sort of buzzing feeling, but I don't get anxious anymore. But if you're kind of still in that place, one thing that you can do to try and sort of work through that is turn anxiety into excitement. Because the physical manifestations of anxiety, like the clammy palms and the kind of the racing heart and the butterflies, those are indistinguishable from the physical manifestations of excitement. So your body, from the neck down, your body doesn't know the difference between anxiety and excitement. So what psychologists have done is that they've actually trained subjects in some studies to simply tell themselves when they are anxious, when they have to do a public speaking, engagement, or they have to do a math test, they tell yourself when you feel those things, that's excitement. I'm excited for this. Because it actually is true, like if it's something you chose to do, you are like, if you're, hours before you've woken up on race morning, and you have a race ahead of you and you're anxious, you are excited because this is your sport, right? You train for this. You've invested a lot in this. You do want to achieve your goal. So, as I mentioned in the book, this hasn't been done. It should be. Hasn't been done yet in the context of an actual endurance race, but it has been done with public speaking and math tests. And when people do this, when they feel those physical symptoms of anxiety and they tell themselves consciously, I'm excited, they actually do perform better. It's like, it's not like a magic wand, but I think it's the sort of thing where it's better than nothing, where you just actually, instead of just suffering through it and letting it happen and sort of being a victim of your emotions, you take control of them to the degree you can. Self-consciousness, that is really the mechanism by which choking, this phenomenon of choking, impairs performance. Choking, as I mentioned in the book, is a term that we all use colloquially for underperforming under pressure situations, in sports or whatever. But it's as I explained in the book, it's not the pressure directly that makes you underperform. It is self-consciousness. When you feel intense pressure, I'm supposed to win, or if I don't achieve my goal, everyone will laugh at me, that type of thing. When you feel that kind of pressure, it makes you more self-conscious. And when you turn your attention inward versus outward, focused on the task at hand, you perform worse. And what's interesting is that you perform worse in all kinds of sports. So if you think of sports that depend on hand-eye coordination, like marksmanship or whatever, if you are more internally focused when you're trying to just shoot a bullet into a target, you will be less accurate. But the same thing happens in endurance sports as well, but in a slightly different way. The more self-conscious you are, the more focused you are on your suffering, and the less focused you are on just doing what you got to do. The road ahead, the back of the competitor you want to catch, your split times or whatever, and that will also cause you to underperform. So, in the book, I get into more depth than I will in this interview. But it's important to just recognize as an athlete who may be a choker, and I coach an athlete right now who I'm working through. It's very common. Just someone who she tells me I was a terrible test taker in school. And now she's a fit and talented and hardworking athlete, but she has a tendency to underperform in races because of this pressure and the self-consciousness that it induces. And so what you want to train yourself to do is try to keep your attentional focus outside yourself. I mean, you have to monitor yourself to a certain degree, but just like be present. Just stay focused on relevant and external stimuli that will help you perform your best. So I've gone through anxiety, self-consciousness. What was number 3? I'm too old to remember. I can't remember 3 things.
That's okay, Matt. On that note, though, like you talk about like that self-esteem and that insecurity that we're touching on there around anxiety. Sometimes for people, that can turn into, they channel that into harder work and working harder to make up for that. And then how that insecurity then can lead to overtraining and, unfortunately for people, injury. And in that working harder, people fail to listen to their body and end up injured. Can you talk about the sort of that trap that people fall into with that just working harder?
Yeah, so I refer to that as the hard work security blanket. And you see a lot in endurance sports. If you just look at the general population, most people really don't want to work hard. But endurance athletes are a special breed. It attracts people who are willing to work hard. And, something that every endurance athlete learns, early on is that hard work pays off, right? So, if I train 30 minutes a day, I get so fit. If I train 45 minutes a day, I get even fitter. So there's this tendency to sort of latch onto that and just sort of wish and hope that working harder is the solution to everything. Well, it isn't. Hard work does pay, but only to a point, and a whole host of other things matter as well. And so what happens to athletes who tend to be insecure, just in terms of like a personality characteristic, is that they're the ones who are most likely to latch on to working harder as the solution to everything, and it can produce terrible consequences. I give actually it is Paula Newby-Fraser whose story I tell in that connection, where she was just absolutely dominating her sport for a long time, but she was insecure, just baggage from childhood, and so she ended up abandoning sort of the training formula that had led her to the mountaintop to try something much more intense, too intense, and she ended up crashing and burning, and just learning the lesson and then coming back even stronger. But that's a common thing, and what I've seen over and over. It's funny because typically, truly world-class athletes, they're much less likely to latch onto that hard work security blanket than like really serious recreational athletes are. I've spent my fair share of time around both groups, and that's one of the sort of psychological differences that is like a clear pattern, where the athletes at the top, they're totally willing to work hard, but they're equally willing to abandon a workout that's not going well, to take a day off when they need a day off. You need reason to be the captain of the ship. Like it's every bit as important to be smart and to have good judgment as it is to be tough. Like, don't get me wrong, toughness is crucial, but if you think that that's all you need, you have work to do. The athletes who just get to the top and stay on top are just every bit as smart as they are tough.
Matt, there is so much. I mean, certainly in the time we have together today, we haven't touched on many of the other fascinating, intriguing aspects of this psychobiological model around, things like expectations of performance, affecting people's performance.
That was the one I forgot.
That was the third one. I thought we'd do roll pipe, but if you've got a moment to speak to it, go for it.
Yeah, so, expectations tend to be self-fulfilling. So if you expect to fail, you're more likely to fail. If you expect to succeed, you're more likely to succeed. I think that's sort of commonsensical, but it's another thing that you can sort of consciously take control of. One example I like to give is that, for years I've been beating the drum of, most endurance athletes do their easy runs and rides and swims too hard. And it's just true. It's a fact. The research shows it. The real world evidence shows it. That I feel like you need to really take your easy workouts truly easy, and you'll perform better. But it's a hard message to just get across to people. When I came up with this, when I learned of the research of Stephen Seiler, exercise physiologist in Norway. He came up with this 80-20 rule that he discovered that I guess we'll discuss the next time we speak. But the idea is that it's a scientifically proven fact now that endurance athletes tend to perform the best or improve the most when they do 80% of their training at low intensity. So I wrote this book, 80-20 Running, and it was the same message I had always been giving to athletes, but now it had like shtick to it. There was a sizzle to it. It was like a nice little, it was like this hot, sexy concept, and it made all the difference in the world. Like, athletes are able to sort of like, oh, this is the secret sauce, and they bought into it, and then so suddenly the same message I'd been giving before finally was internalized by athletes. And I get emails every day with people saying, it changed my life. I started 80-20 training 6 months ago, and I beat my marathon PR by 20 minutes or whatever. And that's the power of expectation at work. So it's not just the X's and O's of how you train, it's the buy-in that matters. Like, that's why I really encourage every endurance athlete to be sort of a student of the sport, because you'll get much better results from basically the same training if you understand why you're doing what you're doing and you really believe in it. Like, this is something that every good coach understands. Like, they try to sort of semi-benignly brainwash their athletes. It's like, you know what? We've got something that no one else has. Like, we have an edge. We've got the formula. There's absolutely something to it. So in all kinds of ways, like, just expecting more, like setting yourself up to expect more, will allow you to achieve more.
It's that faith in your training being almost as important as the training itself, right?
Absolutely. That's really true.
Matt Fitzgerald, you have two fans here, avid fans here, and we are so thankful for your time. Finally, with questions here, every guest of the show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So what's Matt Fitzgerald's physical challenge to listeners going to be for the week?
Shoot. Well, you know what? Like, I'll give you mine.
Please.
Well, I'm coming back from an injury. So this is my first week of actually trying to run 6 days in a row. But, so that's me. Maybe not everyone listening is coming back from an injury, but I'm a huge believer that, like, the single most important, variable in training, like training variable, that is a contributor to success is consistency. So I have like a do something every day rule. Like, even when I'm traveling and it's crazy and I'm jet lagged and underslept and I've got meetings starting early, like it's my 10-minute rule. Like, I'll find the treadmill in the hotel I'm staying in, and I'll tell myself just get on there for 10 minutes. Just like 10, anything is better than nothing. So that would be my challenge to athletes. Is like, you don't have to work out 5 hours on Saturday or Sunday, but my challenge is do something every day. Like, even no matter what your goal is, exercise, working out should be a more or less daily habit. So do something every day.
Brilliant. Matt, your book, How Bad Do You Want It, is just one of many titles you've authored. So where can listeners interested in How Bad Do You Want It find, obviously, the other publications you've produced?
Yeah, so my personal website is mattfitzgerald.org, and I've got my tentacles in other places from there, but like, that's the hub, that's the place to start.
Easy, and we'll tag that up, listeners, in the show notes. So jump over. Last question, Matt. What's the best companion in the Matt Fitzgerald stable of books for How Bad Do You Want It? Someone grabs this, perhaps they've already listened to it. What should they read next of yours?
But it's kind of triumvirate. Like, a big part of my shtick is like learning from the masters. I love science, but I think science is overplayed a little bit, and I like to put just as much emphasis on learning and copying the best practices of the best athletes. And that works for every dimension of endurance sports. So we've talked about the psychological dimension. There's also the training dimension. 80-20 running is where that's really like, that's what the pros do. The pros do the 80-20 thing. The rest of us don't. But research shows we get better if we also do the 80-20 thing. So I've got 80-20 running. I've also got 80-20 triathlon coming out in September. So look ahead to that. And then even also on the nutrition side, Eat Like the Pros, The Endurance Diet. My book is all about that as well. So a trifecta.
Fantastic. So we'll keep an eye out for those. And Matt, we would love to get you back to do a whole dedicated episode around the 80-20 training principle.
Awesome. Yep, happy to do that.
So there you have it. Another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I trust and I believe you cannot not have enjoyed today's episode with Matt Fitzgerald and all the fascinating insights he brings into the psychology of optimum performance. If you did enjoy today's episode, then be sure to let myself, Matt, and Lewis, co-host today, know. You can find us over on social media at Brad_Beer on Instagram, Fitzgerald.Matt on Instagram, and also _Lewis Craig _ for Lewis on Instagram as well. Big thanks to Lewis Craig, Pogo physiotherapist, for jumping in and co-hosting the interview with me today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it was Lewis who first introduced me to Matt and his writings through one of his other books, which we will feature a full episode around 80-20 running. As Matt mentioned, 80-20 triathlon is soon to be hot off the press, so you want to stay tuned for that release as well. Highly encourage you, if you are yet to read How Bad Do You Want It and pick up your own copy, then you can do so over on Matt's website, mattfitzgerald.org. Obviously, the books are prolific. You can find them anywhere where good books are sold. If today was your first time tuning into the Physical Performance Show, then a massive welcome to the show. If it was your 109th time, then thank you for your ongoing support. If you did enjoy today's episode and know someone in your world who would benefit or enjoy it, then please take a moment to share it with them. Sharing means that this show discovers the earbuds of more people who, just like you, are looking to pursue their physical best performance. And it also means a lot to myself and the featured guests. So thanks in advance for sharing the episode around. Of course, don't forget to hit subscribe if you'd like to get each and every episode of the Physical Performance Show into your earbuds each and every week as the show goes live on Thursday evenings. If you've been enjoying the show, then please consider or make a moment to leave a review or a rating over on iTunes. It's simple. You can do so now right from your smartphone. Ratings and reviews really are the currency of the podcast, if you like, which helps to get the word out about the Physical Performance Show enormously. So I'm always so appreciative of ratings and reviews. This week, I want to say a massive thank you to regular show listener Michael Sullivan. Michael rated the show 5 stars, commenting that the podcasts are both insightful and informative, a great combination of relevant content mixed in with some entertainment value also. Some great guests on the show and a mix of athletes from every sport to provide insight and a range of motivation techniques, injury prevention, as well as training and recovery tips and tricks. So Michael, thanks very much for your support of the show and also for taking the time to leave a review. A big thanks to the team who make the Physical Performance Show possible each and every week. That is Susan Wilkin on all things administration, Matthew Olding on all things graphic design, and Daryl Misson, our amazing audio engineer, on all things audio. A huge thank you to today's episode's sponsor, the Gold Coast Marathon, for making this show possible. Podcasts are free to download, however, they are not free to produce. And if you are yet to register for the Gold Coast Marathon, then do not miss it. It's held on the beautiful coastline of the Gold Coast. It's a scenic course, a flat course, and it's one of my favourite events that I've ever participated in across 20 years of endurance sports. I've done the marathon, I believe, 7 times, the half marathon numerous times, and also the 10-kilometre edition of the race. If you're into good times, challenging yourself and looking for an awesome weekend, then don't miss the Gold Coast Marathon. Jump over to goldcoastmarathon.com.au. We are fast approaching the Gold Coast Marathon, and if you are looking to join a team, then consider jumping in the Pogo Physio team. We have a lot of fun. On the day, we provide physio and massage from a secure tent close to the finish line and a whole bunch of other little goodies. If you'd like to join the Pogo Physio team, register for the Gold Coast Marathon or any of the events and simply use the pin capital Team Pogo to register for the Pogo Physio Gold Coast Marathon team. We are looking for your feedback on the Physical Performance Show on how we can improve. So we've opened up a podcast quiz. You can find it over on pogophysio.com.au/podcast, and we are running it right through until episode 115. If you jump over there and leave your thoughts and comments around things that we can do better, then you are in the draw for a $100 voucher for the cinemas of your choice. So thanks in advance for taking part. If you've got something to say, re the Physical Performance Show Getting Better. You can also drop me an email at any time. This might be an idea for a featured guest or anything that you want to communicate around. b.beer@pogophysio.com.au. Coming up in next week's episode 110 of the Physical Performance Show, we're bringing to you a conversation that I had with 3 times Olympic gold medalist Stephanie Rice. The timing of this is perfect if you consider the context of today's conversation with Matt Fitzgerald around mastering the psychology of mind over muscle. Then it's hard to find a better example of an athlete doing just this than Stephanie Rice's 2008 Beijing Olympic triple medal sweep. What made Stephanie Rice's performances so incredible at the Beijing Olympics are that when she swam them, she set world records in each of the 3 races where she took the gold medal. That's right, 3 world records, 3 gold medals, one day at the Olympic Games 2008 Beijing. Stephanie took gold in the 200, 400 individual medley events and also was part of the Australian team in the 4x200 metre freestyle relay. What's amazing is that in winning the 400 metre individual medley, Stephanie won her first gold medal of her career, which was also Australia's first gold medal of the Games and the 400th Summer Olympic medal for Australia. To win the event, Stephanie had to overcome her American adversary, Katie Hoff, who had broken the world record leading in to the Olympic Games at the US Olympic Trials. So this was an example of a great pressure cooker environment in which Stephanie prevailed. So on next week's episode, we unpack those performances. We also talk about Stephanie's transition post her professional swimming. And we cover, of course, the highs, the lows, and the learnings from a remarkable sporting career. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.